15 minutes after my mother sang happy birthday to my mother-in-law, federal agents stormed the house. The candles were still flickering when they dragged my brother away in handcuffs, and my mother screamed my name like it was my fault. I just stood there, frozen, hearing my husband whisper, "Steph, don't move." That was the moment I realized love doesn't always protect you. And sometimes, family is the one who lights the match before they watch you burn. My name is Stephanie Clark, and that night destroyed everything I thought I knew about loyalty. The air inside the old house felt too polished, too perfect, like someone had rehearsed every breath that night. I walked through the foyer of Harrison Estate, pretending the walls didn't remember the arguments we'd once screamed into them. My mother's voice floated from the dining room, warm, cheerful, practiced. Every note of it made my chest tighten. Guests filled the hall, glasses raised, laughter rising over the hum of a piano. The portraits of Evelyn in her Navy uniform lined the walls, her smile young and proud, frozen in a time when honor still meant something. Lucas darted between tables, fixing cables for a slideshow. My mother stood near the fireplace, shaking hands, introducing me like a prize she'd dusted off for the evening. "My daughter works for the government now," she said proudly. "Runs the Veterans Recovery Fund. Service runs in our blood." I smiled, because that's what I'd learned to do around her. Smile and swallow the sting. Beside me, Ethan stayed quiet, his shoulders squared, scanning the room the way he used to scan enemy terrain. His gray eyes moved from the crowd to the far window, then to the kitchen door, calculating something I couldn't see. The string quartet shifted to a livelier tune. I poured myself a drink, but before I could take a sip, Ethan leaned close enough for only me to hear. "There's something off about tonight." I laughed it off. "It's a birthday, not a mission." He didn't even blink. "Then why are there two men by the window wearing earpieces?" I turned. Two strangers in black suits stood in the corner, talking quietly, one of them touching his ear every few seconds. A chill ran down my arms. Before I could ask, Lucas called out from the stage, "Steph, Mom wants a family photo." We gathered in front of the cake, smiling for the camera. My mother's arm wrapped around my shoulders. Her perfume was the same one she wore the day I left home, sharp and sweet and impossible to escape. "I'm glad you came back," she whispered. "Evelyn will be touched. Maybe this is our chance to fix things." "I hope so," I murmured, though the words didn't sound like mine. Ethan stood behind the photographer, watching the kitchen again. I followed his gaze just long enough to catch a flash of movement, someone passing a folder to another guest near the back door. My mother lifted her glass for a toast. The room quieted. Laughter lingered in the air as she began to speak, but I could feel Ethan's hand brush mine, steady, tense. The song began, "Happy Birthday," and the guests joined in, clapping, singing, smiling. I tried to let it feel normal. Then, Ethan's voice cut through the music, low and certain. "Steph, get your bag. We're leaving. Now." Before I could move, the front door burst open. White light flooded the room. "Federal warrant, step away from the table." The words sliced through the laughter. Glass shattered. My mother dropped her drink. Lucas froze mid-step. Evelyn sat motionless, the candles still burning on the untouched cake. Agents in black swarmed in, shouting orders. One of them read from a folder, his voice like gravel. "Margaret and Lucas Harrison, you are under federal investigation for veterans benefit fraud." Everything inside me went silent. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Ethan's hand closed around mine, pulling me backward. His voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "I told you," he said. "This isn't a birthday. It's a setup." The sirens outside screamed through the night as red and blue lights flashed across the walls. I stood between two worlds, the one that raised me, and the one that had just torn it apart. 2 days before the party, an email from my mother arrived. "Evelyn's 75th. She deserves something grand. Come home." The words "come home" hit like a bruise. I'd left that house after a fight that never healed. When I told her service wasn't about money, she'd laughed and said I could afford to believe that since I'd married a Navy paycheck. Ethan read the email, quiet for a while, then said, "We'll go, but stay cautious." The Harrison estate looked smaller than I remembered, its white porch polished to perfection beside the lake. New security cameras blinked along the driveway. Ethan muttered, "Either your mom's paranoid, or she's guarding something worth hiding." Inside, my mother smiled too wide. She hugged me, turned to Ethan, and said sweetly, "Still surprised you're around?" I laughed. He didn't. Later, while helping her sort papers for the event, I found a folder stamped with the VA logo, a list of veterans marked transfer approved. Some of the names belonged to men I'd treated years ago. I asked what it was. She waved me off. "Just paperwork for the fund." Ethan looked over my shoulder, snapped a quick photo, and tucked his phone away. I didn't realize until later he'd sent it to someone in NCIS with a message. Something's wrong. That night, he stood on the porch, smoking. I told him he was overreacting. He said, "That's what I thought before every ambush." Near midnight, I woke to voices from the study. My mother and Lucas were on a video call. "He'll be there tomorrow. She'll sign it in front of everyone." And the codes? Already loaded. When I entered, they froze. My mother smiled too easily. "Just discussing a memorial fund." Ethan appeared behind me, his tone sharp. "You're planning something. I can hear it in your breathing." No one spoke. By morning, the house buzzed with tension. My mother barked orders. Lucas paced, checking his phone. Evelyn sat pale by the window, whispering she wanted a quiet dinner, ignored by everyone. From the upstairs window, I spotted a black SUV idling across the lake, engine running. A man inside held a radio to his mouth. I turned to call Ethan, but Lucas grabbed my hand, eyes bright and hard. "Don't worry, Steph. Tonight changes everything." His smile chilled me to the bone. The morning sky over Shenandoah was painfully clear, yet the air inside Harrison Estate felt dense, almost metallic. I stood in the kitchen, watching my mother order the catering staff around as if commanding troops. She instructed them to make sure everyone signed the donation list before the photos were taken, calling it a matter of family honor. In the living room, Evelyn sat quietly in an armchair, her face pale and tired. When she asked what fund she was supposed to be signing, Lucas smiled and said she just needed to confirm her support. Something about the way his hand hovered protectively over the papers made my stomach twist. Ethan slipped outside for a moment and came back with that still, dangerous look I'd seen before deployment briefings. He murmured that 2 men were standing by the lake, one whispering into a wrist mic. I tried to laugh it off as private security, but he didn't. "Security doesn't use encrypted military frequencies," he muttered. My pulse started to quicken, but I forced a smile because my mother was walking toward us. The music swelled as the party gathered in the dining hall. Lucas took the microphone, thanking the guests and announcing the launch of a new Veterans Fund. Evelyn blinked in confusion. My mother beamed and told her it was just a formality. Ethan leaned close to me and whispered, "Look at her glass." I glanced down. A faint blue tint floated on the surface of Evelyn's water. Before I could react, he switched her glass for another, pocketing the first. Moments later, the front door exploded open. Men in plain clothes rushed in, shouting commands. "NCIS! Nobody move!" Screams echoed, glass shattered, lights flashed red and white. My mother froze. Lucas dropped the documents, his voice cracking as agents surrounded him. "Margaret and Lucas Harrison, you're under arrest for veterans benefit fraud." I couldn't breathe. Ethan grabbed my shoulders, guiding me back. "They're here because of what I sent," he said calmly. The words hit harder than the sirens. I stared at him, horrified. "You called them." He didn't flinch. "To protect you, and Evelyn. Your brother was about to make her sign." Evelyn was carried out on a stretcher, barely conscious. Lucas screamed that it was all a misunderstanding. My mother sobbed, accusing Ethan of destroying us. He met her eyes coldly. "You did that yourselves." As the blue and red lights bled across the walls, I sank to the floor. The cake still sat on the table, candles burning down to wax. The house smelled of sugar and smoke. I'd lost everything in a moment that should have been filled with laughter. The next morning, my face was everywhere, on the news, on headlines that read, "Clark family involved in veterans fraud operation." They showed a still of me and Ethan leaving the house, my expression hollow. Before noon, I received a suspension notice from the Department of Veterans Affairs. My mother was under house arrest. Lucas remained in custody. I was free but tainted. An NCIS investigator visited that afternoon, sliding a file across the table. "This is your digital signature on the transfer, isn't it?" My voice caught as I denied it. He said the fingerprint verification matched mine. Somehow, someone had stolen my biometric ID from my old military records. Only an insider could have done it. I confronted Ethan, anger shaking my hands. "You sent that evidence without telling me." He didn't raise his voice. "If I had, you'd have tried to protect them." I shouted that they were my family. He looked straight at me. "And you're mine." I realized then he hadn't betrayed me. He'd chosen to lose my trust to save me from becoming one of them. That evening, Ethan got a call from his NCIS contact. The documents Lucas carried linked to an active federal account in D.C., authorized under something called Project Harlow. The name attached to it was Falcon. When I asked who that was, Ethan's face hardened. "A man I once served under, and I never trusted him." Later, I sat in our small rental house, the TV casting its pale light on the walls. The anchor's voice droned, "Former SEAL and wife connected to Veterans Fund scandal." Was it a family crime or a cover-up? I turned the screen off and looked at Ethan sitting by the window, his uniform jacket draped across the chair. "Maybe you were right," I whispered. He didn't turn around. "About what?" "That some wars never end." 3 days after the raid, the Harrison estate was sealed behind yellow tape. Every network carried the same headline: "Veterans Fund Fraud. Harrison family under federal investigation." My photo flashed across the screen. I was no longer respected, just accused. Rain tapped the roof of our small rental in Fredericksburg as Ethan spoke quietly into his phone, coordinating with NCIS. When I asked if he truly believed my family was guilty, he didn't hesitate. He knew. The next morning, a court order froze my accounts. 2 transfers had been made to Belize under my name. Ethan studied the notice, jaw tight. Someone had used my VA clearance codes. That afternoon, I visited Evelyn, frail but lucid. She whispered that my mother and Lucas had used her access too, saying it was for veterans. "Money doesn't protect anyone," she said. "It stains what's left of honor." That night, Ethan's contact confirmed the trail led to a Belize account under the codename Falcon. He froze. Falcon had been his commanding officer in Yemen, now a deputy secretary. My family, it seemed, had been pawns in something much larger. The next day, NCIS summoned Ethan for questioning. Before leaving, he told me to tell them everything, even about him. I watched on TV as he entered their headquarters, the caption reading "Former SEAL questioned in fraud case." For the first time, justice felt lonelier than guilt. I couldn't sleep. The calls, the headlines, all asking the same thing. I didn't know the full truth yet. Facing my mother, I demanded it. She claimed it was for me, for the family. I told her she'd done it through me. Then, behind a family photo, I found a hidden hard drive. Thousands of emails appeared, Falcon's orders, Lucas's confirmations, and one message that said it all. "Transfer complete. VA code verified by S. Clark." The truth had surfaced, but the cost was only beginning. The marble hallway of the federal courthouse in Washington gleamed under cold light, every echo of my footsteps swallowed by the weight of what was about to unfold. Ahead lay the courtroom where my family's sins, and my name, would finally be stripped bare. Ethan squeezed my hand, whispering that honor wasn't about winning, but about standing when no one else would. Inside, my mother sat hunched beside Lucas, both pale and silent. Evelyn was wheeled in, frail but resolute. Across from us stood Deputy Secretary Thomas Falcon Rains, the man who once commanded Ethan and had turned loyalty into leverage. The prosecutor projected the recovered emails onto the screen, revealing Falcon's orders for Lucas to use Evelyn's credentials and my biometric signature to drain funds meant for fallen soldiers. When my mother took the stand, her voice trembled. "They told us it was legal," she said, "that we were helping veterans." When asked who told her, she raised a shaking hand toward Falcon. The room fell silent. Falcon's lawyer pounced, accusing Ethan of vengeance for leaving under his command. Ethan rose calmly, saying he hadn't been discharged, he'd walked away when Honor did. Then it was my turn. Lucas couldn't lift his head as I took the oath. I told the court I hadn't come for revenge, but because truth deserved a witness. I spoke of the falsified records, the doctored glass, the forged signature that bore my fingerprint but not my consent. That difference, I said, defined honor. The prosecutor played the final recording. Falcon's voice, ordering the funds, moved under my ID. Gasps filled the courtroom. Falcon's face drained of color as agents cuffed his wrists. My mother wept. Evelyn's tears glistened. Ethan whispered that I'd brought the truth to light, but I told him the truth had done that itself. When I stepped outside, sunlight poured across Constitution Avenue. The American flag rippled high above me, bright and unbroken. The war was over, but the scars it left would never fade. 3 months after the trial, the verdicts became national news. Falcon was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for fraud and abuse of power. Lucas received 8 for forgery and money laundering. My mother was placed under 2 years of house arrest, stripped of all federal rights. The media called it the Clark case, a symbol of honor scarred by corruption inside the VA system. Justice had arrived, but it felt less like victory and more like a quiet funeral. The Department of Defense offered Ethan a consulting position, but he declined without hesitation. He said he'd seen too many good men trade truth for silence, and he'd rather mend fences than hide lies. Within months, he built a small training ranch in the Blue Ridge Mountains, helping veterans rebuild their lives instead of paperwork. I was reinstated at the VA, but when I stepped back into that building, the walls felt hollow. I turned in my badge. I couldn't lead a program bound by procedure while real people went unseen. Instead, I founded the Evelyn Foundation, named for the woman who had believed in service without ego, helping veterans reclaim their benefits with transparency and dignity. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Evelyn's lawyer. She had passed away quietly. Inside, her handwriting trembled across the page. "Steph, truth rises, even from the ashes of loyalty. Don't let bitterness take what war couldn't." The tears came before I finished reading, but for the first time, they felt like release. At her memorial, sunlight dipped low across the field as Ethan read aloud, his voice steady. "Some battles are fought in silence," he said, "and some victories belong to those who tell the truth." The flag fluttered above us in the amber light, and for once, the air felt still, like peace had finally found its way home. A year later, I returned to Arlington on a quiet May morning. A thin veil of fog drifted across the endless rows of white headstones, each one whispering a story of sacrifice. I stopped before Evelyn's grave. Etched into the stone were her last words. "Truth rises, even from the ashes of loyalty." I laid a bouquet of white roses at its base and whispered, "You were right. Honor doesn't die. It only waits." Ethan stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. We carried it. "Steph, now let it float," he said softly. I smiled through the ache in my chest. "Maybe the best revenge isn't punishment," I told him. "It's restoring honor." The morning sun broke through the mist, glinting off the marble and the small flags lining each grave. In the distance, the bugle's mournful notes of taps rolled through the air, slow and solemn. As we turned to leave, I noticed a young boy kneeling by an unmarked grave, placing a single daisy on the stone. He looked up and smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and in his blue eyes, I saw the same quiet courage that once lived in Evelyn. That was when I understood. Truth rises across generations, not through words, but through the choices we keep making. That evening, Ethan and I returned to the lake where it all began. The water was still, the moon reflected in silver light. I used to think peace was silence. I whispered, "Now I know it's earned." Ethan's voice was steady beside me. Every generation fights its own war. Ours is truth. I looked toward the porch, where the American flag swayed in the night breeze. For the first time, the ache was gone, replaced by the quiet grace of honor restored.